Good morning, friends. This is Matt Greer. I'm the Artistic Director of Quintessence, a community of singers in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We are so happy if you are joining us live today, or if you're watching this a little bit later. We have a real treat this morning, which is a lead up to our 12th annual Quintessence Summer Choral Festival. I am joined this morning by, as many of you are aware, the composer of the piece that we're getting ready to start rehearsals on. Christopher Tin is a two-time Grammy-winning composer of concert and media music. His music has been performed and premiered in many of the world's most prestigious venues, including the Royal Albert Hall, the Sydney Opera House, Lincoln Center, Kennedy Center, the Hollywood Bowl, the United Nations, and Carnegie Hall. And it has been performed by ensembles such as the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, the National Symphony Orchestra, and performers such as Frederica von Stade, Long Long, and Voces 8. And he is the composer of The Lost Birds and Extinction Elegy that we're giving the New Mexico premiere of in just a couple of weeks. Chris, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're so happy to have you with us.
I'm glad to be here as well.
And you're joining us from Santa Monica, California. Are you a Californian?
I sure am. Born and bred and raised here almost all my life, except for a short stint in the United Kingdom.
Oh, nice. And I'm curious to start off with about what your gateway was into music as a kid. Was it piano? Was it singing?
It's piano. I think I was obligated to take piano growing up as a young Asian American kid. We were just all sort of enrolled in it. I didn't take to it until I was about 11 or 12. I think I was actually always very good at it, and I was very good at music theory from an early age. But I didn't take piano seriously until I was maybe junior high school, or roughly that age. I was also very into other, I think I played trumpet, I played guitar, I played bass and jazz combos. I played a bunch of different things growing up. I was one of these sort of like voracious music nerds.
Yeah.
And I still am to a certain extent.
Well, yeah, I would think so. I'm curious, though, because we're here, obviously, because we're doing a choral piece, and so much of your music now is written for voices. Did you sing in choir yourself?
I did. My senior year in high school, I got roped into choir by a bunch of my friends who they were all girls, and they're like, "We need guys,
Of course.
Come join choir." It's I think a pretty common story, actually. I did enjoy it. I joined the concert choir, and I immediately joined the sort of the chamber ensemble as well. I think that's really where sort of my interest in choral music got sparked.
Tenor or bass?
Tenor.
Oh gosh.
Tenor!
Can you come out and sing with us on the 28th of July?
You need tenors?
We could always use more tenors. Yeah, always. So at what point for you did you decide that maybe this is what you wanted to do as a life's work, and how did being a performing musician evolve into being a composer?
I think, the second question is easier to answer. I think I always knew that I was okay. I was pretty decent on my instrument. I could play a lot of different things, but there was always somebody who was better than me anywhere I went, as a musician, like as an instrumentalist, as a singer or whatever. There's always somebody, right? But on the music theory side, on the compositional side, that's where I felt that I was standing out from the crowd. And it's honestly what I enjoyed more. I love writing music. That's my thing. So I pursued that instead. And I can't pinpoint the exact date when I said, this is going to be it. I think I was looking for sort of, signs from the universe saying, okay, Chris, maybe you should actually go into this professionally. And they start trickling in. You get accepted, for example, to a conservatory, or you win a big scholarship. Like in my case, I won a Fulbright scholarship to pay for my time in the UK. Things like that were just sort of signposts from the universe that said, hey, maybe you should actually take this seriously.
Was it difficult for your parents to accept, or were they encouraging of you to make a profession in music?
They were encouraging, actually. I've always had a lot of support from my parents, which isn't something that not everyone can say that.
Right.
But it is a wonderful thing, actually.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So we have the people that are watching today. I suspect a lot of them are people who are signed up to sing the Lost Birds at the festival that's starting next week. If you will type your questions in the chat, we will answer them towards the end of our conversation. But as they come up, feel free to just type them in the chat box, and we'll get to them towards the end. I think I first started hearing about your music in choral circles maybe 5 or 8 years ago, and went to a performance that a friend and colleague of mine, Aaron Howe, did in Albuquerque of a piece of yours. And I was just blown away by the piece that I heard. And I think he's conducted a couple of your major works here now. And everybody that I talked to that was involved in these performances were just so in love with the music. And so when I started to kind of dig in and learn about you myself, one of the things that I guess surprised me, well, let me ask the question this way. My wife is a pianist and a piano teacher, and she has wonderful students, and often, advanced students will come in and say, could I maybe play this Disney song or this piece from a musical or whatever? And she noticed several years ago, students coming in and saying, could I please play this wonderful piece that I first heard in a video game? And I had never realized that video game music had become a genre that composers were really, really writing for. And that was that's kind of one of the places where you got your start or became known is in video game music. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Actually, I think it is the place which launched my career. It was the video game Civilization 4, which came out in 2005. And I wrote this piece, Baba Yetu, which is, I think, probably one of my best known pieces in the choral world. Actually, probably just across the board, one of my best known pieces. And it was the first piece of music I actually wrote for a video game. And it was, it opened my mind, and it just introduced me to just how large of an audience video games have. As a kid myself, I did play video games. And in fact, I played Civilization growing up. So it was a nice sort of project for me to get into. But what I quickly discovered is just how many rabid fans there are, not only of video games, but actually of the music that comes out of video games. And what I've discovered more and more as the years go on, is that there are a lot of community ensembles that have formed specifically to play video game music. So I was in Washington, D.C. most of the months of May and June for the premiere of my completion of Turandot. Turandot is Puccini's last opera. He died before he could finish it. Over the years, various composers have written new endings to Turandot. So I did one for the Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center. And one of the things that we did was we did a sing-along. We called it the Christopher Tin Sing-In, leading up to opening night of Turandot, where we invited the general public to come sing some of my best-known choral pieces, including Baba Yetu and Sogno di Volare, which are both from the Civilization franchise. But also, I taught them that night my choral finale of Turandot. And then we did a little mini performance at the Kennedy Center with 1,000 people.
Oh, how cool.
It was awesome. Yeah, it's totally cool. And the orchestra that accompanied this entire event was the Washington Metropolitan Gamer Symphony Orchestra, which is I think 140 strong symphony orchestra, entirely volunteer, of people who love video game music and just want to perform it in an orchestra. And what's crazy is that Washington, the whole Washington area, has, I believe, 3 of these volunteer, dedicated video game symphony orchestras. There's one at the University of University of Maryland. And actually, there's another one in Baltimore, so not too far away. But it just speaks to the popularity of video game music, where in one sort of metropolitan area, you have 3 huge symphony orchestras entirely volunteer. Like, there isn't a single volunteer film music orchestra that I know of.
Right.
Yes, they do film music concerts, but it really speaks to sort of the passion amongst the video game community.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And like I said, it just kind of crossed my radar because I've never been a video gamer, how serious people are about the experience and how much music adds to it. So that's very cool that people are learning instruments and joining orchestras so that they can play this music. It's kind of amazing.
Well, I mean, so just to piggyback on that point, I mean, I think that yeah, I mean, a lot of people, video game music actually does to non-musicians. We're talking about musicians so far, but
Right.
game music is actually a bit of a gateway for orchestral music for non-classical musicians.
Sure.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I can see it.
Big time. Yeah.
Well,
So,
I
I mean,
want to go ahead.
yeah, go on. No,
No,
I'm done rambling. Carry, do your thing. Yeah.
I want to talk specifically about the piece that we're of yours that we're getting ready to rehearse. And you and I have chatted a little, but we have over 100 singers who are signed up who will begin rehearsals a week from Saturday and put it together in a week's time. We've got a marvelous professional orchestra hired who just can't wait to get into finally rehearsing this music. Tell me about the origins of this piece and why you were kind of moved to deal with this material and how it evolved.
Boy, the origins actually go all the way back to 2012. I was actually commissioned to write a score for a documentary about a sculptor named Todd McGrain, who was making sculptures to memorialize bird species that had gone extinct. And he was creating these giant bronze sculptures, and he was actually placing them around Northern America in the last known locations where these birds were spotted. So, the passenger pigeon was, in Ohio, and the great auk was in Newfoundland. And this is a documentary about bird extinction, but also his artistic journey trying to encapsulate that tragedy in his form of work. And as so often happens for me, when I see something beautiful, the music starts playing, right? And when in the process of scoring this documentary, I saw for the first time a murmuration of starlings, which I'd never actually known that was a thing before. We don't have starlings in California. The first time I saw that, I thought, wow, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And that's when I wrote the piece that eventually became the overture to The Lost Birds, Flocks a Mile Wide. The music just played in my head. And I wrote that piece for that film. But then I often, over the following years, I would say, I want to do more with this topic. I think there's a lot to be explored here. It just took a long time to find the time to explore that, and also the right set of circumstances, and actually just to solidify the concept in my mind as well. And then the pandemic rolls along. And then I think I was looking for a project to do at the time. And I'd still had this idea of a requiem for extinct birds in the back of my head. And I just signed to Universal as my record label. Also signed to Universal are this fantastic British octet named Voces 8. And so our managers got to talking and saying, hey, can we do something? And they were the perfect ensemble to do something, because as you know, they sort of put themselves in a bit of a sort of like a bubble early on during the pandemic where, they could sort of sing and be with each other, but not really be concerned. So we were able to actually get the project rolling. And they had these very sophisticated recording facilities of their own. So we chatted about ideas. I went away for, 6 months, 9 months or whatever, wrote the piece, brought it back to them, and we recorded it. And, in the process of working with them, that's when the piece really took shape. That's when I chose the poems. That's when I sort of outlined the arc of it all, figured out how I was going to connect movements sort of musically. It was a very collaborative project with them.
Yeah, that's just absolutely marvelous. What a set of voices to have in your head to compose for. I mean, it's just been,
right.
Amazing. Yeah. I'm struck by the fact that you chose all female poets for the text. Was that by design, or were those just the poems that you responded to having to do with birds?
They're just the poems I responded to having with birds. And actually, I mean, many of them are actually just some of my favorite poets anyway. Christina Rossetti, Sarah Teasdale. I mean, I could set their poems for days. I mean, when I read their poetry, It's just, it's immediate what needs to be done. That's not always the case with every poet you read. And actually, Dickinson presents often a bit of a challenge to me. Edna St. Vincent Millay was new to me, but she wrote some key poems that addressed the topic of birds in very metaphorical ways that I thought I just needed to include.
Mm.
And so I brought her into the loop. At a certain point, I said, well, they're all women. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's not, sometimes you do these things and you do it because the material is the best material. And it's just sort of a happy accident, for example, that it's all women.
Mhm.
But I actually don't feel the need to go around sort of like, highlighting that point in a way. I'm always sort of allergic to performativeness, I guess, in terms of representation and
Uh-huh.
whatever else. And I think that, there's no need to pat yourself on the back for, anything like using all women poets or anything like that. There's just, they just happen to write the best poems. And that's why I chose them. And
Yeah.
that's enough in a way, in my mind.
Done. One of the things that our folks who have the score, because they've been studying diligently, preparing, getting ready to rehearse, may have noticed is that each movement has a different origin. Each movement has a different commissioner. And I
Hmm.
wonder if you would talk about that process, because some of the inscriptions are intriguing and quite moving. So how did you go about helping this piece get to be through the commissioning process?
Actually, I'm very fortunate in that I have a sort of a broad base of people who are willing to pay me to write music. And they're often not connected to a choir or anything like that, but they just want to help bring the music into the world.
Mhm.
So a lot of the movements were commissioned by donors, private donors, through a Kickstarter campaign that I ran to
Oh,
fund
really?
the whole album. Yeah. This album was funded by um, an enormous Kickstarter campaign um, that actually broke the record for highest funded classical music Kickstarter campaigns, a record that was previously held by me for a different album. But a lot of the more intriguing and non-standard commission inscriptions you might see on the sheet music were people who, just like they funded the album at the highest level, and part of
I
the
see.
perks of funding the record were, this is a movement that you've commissioned on
Mhm.
the record. So that's what some of those are.
That's a wonderful way of collaboration, of building a community around creating something. That's really, really amazing that that was so successful for you. That's great. Um,
Yeah, it's
Go ahead.
crucial as a composer. I think you want to, as a composer, you do want to build your audience as much as possible.
Yeah.
No matter how small that audience starts. Boy, okay, I heard some great advice from actually one of the commissioners, named a guy by the name of Dan Banerjee. He was told a story where Taylor Swift, before she was famous, before she was Taylor Swift, met with a manager. And this manager told her, look, if you want to sell 500,000 records, you need to meet 500,000 people. And like, I'd never heard it put quite like that before. But it
Mm.
really does, it's really useful advice. Like, you build an audience, no matter where you're starting from, 0 followers, whatever. You just got to go out there and meet people, be the face of your music, preferably be a nice person as well.
Yeah.
This community is, it pays dividends. Like, creating a community around who you are and what you like to make, long term is what keeps it going. So I'm very passionately devoted to my fans, I have to say.
That's wonderful. I actually want to play a video of a performance from Voces 8, actually the Voces 8 Foundation Choir and Orchestra. This is from their Live from London series that a lot of people got hooked on during lockdown. They just kept putting out such amazing music. And this is a beautiful video. And this is actually courtesy of Barney Smith that we're able to show this today. This is the last movement of the piece, the 12th movement of 12 movements. And is there anything you would say about this movement in particular, or anything more about the architecture of the piece leading up to it?
This movement is a bookend alongside the overture. It's basically a choral reprise of the theme of the overture. And it was a piece that I knew I wanted to set for a long time. I found this poem, Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson, had no idea how to set it for years and years and years, and then finally figured out with this piece.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. So this is the last movement of Christopher Tin's The Lost Birds and Extinction Elegy. This is Hope is the Thing with Feathers. That is so beautiful, Chris.
Thanks.
One thing I was thinking as I was as I was watching that again, but also, and by the way, if you have questions, we're about to open it up, friends, so type them in the chat. But as I've been thinking about as I'm preparing the score to conduct is I love the colors in the orchestration, and I'm always fascinated by orchestration. Is orchestration a part of the process that you really enjoy?
Yeah, that's actually, I would say, my main thing, actually, writing for the orchestra, especially writing for strings. Now, I was never a string player myself, but um, just the way the orchestra is assembled like a machine with all these interlocking parts really appeals to me for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
Like, I
was
love,
again
yeah.
I was thinking and looking and preparing the score. I was thinking that, this could work just beautifully with string orchestra alone. But I'm so glad that you added harp and just a little bit of percussion. I love the percussion notes all the way through, the vibes and the glock and the various little grace notes and color that it adds. I think it's just really gorgeous.
Thank you. Thanks. This is, interestingly, one of the smallest orchestral ensembles I've ever written for. Everything I write for is kind of enormous, um,
Yeah.
but it's a bit of a challenge for me in a way to whittle things down. But
Uh-huh.
it's a good challenge.
Good. I'm so glad. We have people who have been joining us, and Nicole told me actually we have already answered most of their questions, but maybe there are a couple that we haven't answered. So, Quintessence singers and others. Jude Harb, who happens to be a composition major, I know. My question for Mr. Tin is this: what advice would you give to aspiring composers who are looking to find their footing with big life changes like moving to a new place or starting a new commission?
Boy, I mean, to a certain extent, you have to kind of get comfortable with dealing with the challenges of life getting in the way of your music as well. Literally, I just moved to a new house. I have piles of, you know, unassembled furniture and boxes and stuff in the backyard, and I've started a new commission as well. I mean, it's one of these things where your life will always kind of get in your way, musically, and you have to sort of get used to it. And I mean, in a certain way, um, sometimes those deadlines are just what you need. I think we tend as composers to get into our own heads and say that idea isn't good and got to be something else. I'm not going to start developing this piece until I've figured it out. There is a strong urge to sort of like poo-poo on your own ideas as you have them as a composer, and that seemingly never goes away. I follow, you probably know Rena Esmail, the choral
Yes.
composer
Yeah.
as well. She posted something about this like a few weeks ago, where she said, "Why do we do this to ourselves? Like, why do we beat ourselves up? You come up with an idea and you say, oh, that can't possibly be good enough. I came up with it, only after one day of heavy work. I need at least a week of, slaving away and beating myself up before I can actually commit to an idea. Why do we do that? Sometimes it's best for the deadline just to say, okay, look, pick something. It's probably a pretty good idea. You're just not allowing yourself to accept that it's a pretty good idea." And actually, a lot of The Lost Birds was written sort of, I wouldn't say with that mindset, but there was a lot of, write this, set it aside for a while, see if something else comes up. And if it doesn't, then just go with what you had before. And I sort of leaned into that process a little more in The Lost Birds and also some of my more recent choral commissions. Just write something, decide a few days later whether it's good or not, but don't just immediately instinctually beat yourself up because an idea came easily to you.
Mm. Yeah, I think that sounds like really good advice. Again, one of the things that I admire in your music is I just think you have a beautiful gift for melody.
Thank you.
Did you go through a period like a lot of composition students do of having to deal with different modes and 12 tone serialism and all of that, or were you always pretty comfortably in a kind of tonal place?
Personally, I was always very comfortably in a tonal place, but where I ran into issue was that none of my professors would support that. All through undergrad, especially studying, I did an exchange program at Oxford.
Mm.
In the UK, it's very modernist as well, even way more so actually than the US. And so like nobody wanted to write me letters of recommendation. Nobody wanted to do, any of that sort of stuff. Like I got pretty much no support as an undergrad. It stings to this day, honestly. But at the end of the day, you also have to be true to who you are and who your own unique gifts are. I was always very melodically driven and oriented. The music that is my favorite music is the music that is written melodically and tonally and done in a very beautiful sort of way. That's just who I am. And you do not get anywhere in life it's sort of denying who you are and denying what your gifts are. If you lean into who you are and you lean into what you're good at, the audience will find you. It doesn't, like, the worst thing you can possibly do is deny your own voice because somebody else told you, oh, that's not what's in the contemporary music landscape. You need to sound more like me, like your teacher or something like that. That gets you nowhere. And the world is littered with composers who did that, who made that choice to not do what they're good at, whether or not it's in fashion or not, whether or not it's like considered progressive enough or, considered artistic enough or whatever. The truth is you just have to be who you are. And that will not only give your unique skills and opportunity to shine, but that's what's going to create your voice in a landscape where everyone is competing with each other to come up with a unique voice. So I don't know, to whatever extent that might help any composers out there, just believe in who you are, do what you do best, do what you love to do the most, and the rest will follow.
Lovely. I think we have one more question. Anita Amstutz, are you composing every day? Do you have gaps of time between composing for months at a time until a piece is finished? Thinking about how one hones a craft.
I wish I could compose every day, but it just doesn't ever work out that way. I think that, like I said, life gets in the way. And there are a lot of things that you need to do. There are times, I kid you not, there are times when I go, for example, a full year without composing something new. And it's not because I don't want to compose, but when you reach a certain level, career-wise, there are a lot of demands on your time that are not composing. And here's an example. After I finished writing The Lost Birds, we had to record it, we had to mix it, I had to prepare the sheet music for publication, I had to prepare alternate versions of the sheet music for publication, which meant a lot of arranging, a lot of engraving, a lot of marketing. Then the record comes out, and then you spend several months marketing that. Maybe you do a performance or two. Pretty soon, before you know it, an entire year has gone by, and you have not written a single new note of music. I think that's what happened to me. Like, I finished writing The Lost Birds in February of 22, I want to say. We did the world premiere February of 23, I think. And in that time, I did not compose anything new. And that kills me, because when I did have to start writing again, it was to finish Puccini's final opera, Turandot, which is not an easy task, let me tell you. And I had been rusty on the compositional front for an entire year. Like, I wasn't coming up with new ideas for an entire year. And it was so hard. It's like anything, like you lose that muscle, right? So ideally, yes, if you can compose every day, great. Try not to go a full year without composing. That is horrible, 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 horrible. And I'll tell you, like, once I ramp up into composer mode, everything comes easy. I write well, but if you go that long without writing, oh my God, starting up again. It's like you're a first-time composer. You barely know whether you can do the job or not. And by the way, your next job is to write completion to Puccini, of all composers. Oh my God, talk about a melodic composer who is at the top of his game his entire life and just amazing, and you have to fill his shoes. Oh, tough task.
Thank you for that answer. I also did want to briefly touch on this amazing thing this spring, because I actually had a couple of friends, Chris, who were at one of the performances of that
Okay.
Turandot production, and they were just blown away.
Great.
And so the background is this is the centenary of Puccini's death. He died in 1924. Turandot, which is a beloved opera in the repertoire, was unfinished at the time of his death. Toscanini famously stopped the music where the music stopped and turned around and told the audience this is where the maestro laid down his pen. And then, kind of like the Mozart Requiem, it was completed by a student of his, and people have hated the ending ever since, or some people have. Is that true? Take it from there.
I mean, it was completed by Franco Alfano, who was another opera composer at the time, but in a very different tradition. He was more of the sort of modernist tradition, sort of, post Richard Strauss. And his completion, it's very interesting on its own artistic terms, but it doesn't match Puccini. And not only that, he was forced to use almost all of Puccini's leftover sketches. And the thing about Puccini's sketchbook is we have no idea whether those sketches were what he would have used himself, right? But his task was to use these sketches, assemble a coherent ending. And by the way, he was not a melodic composer, so it's not like he had a real instinctive gift for handling a lot of this material. And so that ending that he wrote, that was premiered in 1926, has sort of existed as the de facto ending for the last 198 years. Over the last, I'd say 30 or 40 years or so, a few composers have been commissioned to write new endings to replace the Alfano ending. None of them have really caught on, and Alfano is still the default. The latest addition is the ending that I wrote with my librettist, Susan Soon-Hee Stanton. We're hoping it does catch on, but we're not even the most recent new ending that has been completed.
Oh, really?
A week after ours opened at the Kennedy Center, another version by another composer, Derek Wang, opened up in Opera Delaware. I have no idea how that version sounds. I think he was very faithful to Puccini sketches. Like Susan and I we did our own thing. And this, by the way, goes back to this point of do what you do, right? Because as a composer, when you're tasked with something like this, the immediate question is, do you use all of Puccini's sketches and do you try to sound like Puccini? And it actually took a while for me to say, no, I'm not going to use everything Puccini left because he probably wouldn't have. And I'm just going to do my own thing and not make a conscientious effort to be Puccini light, because nobody wants to hear second-rate Puccini, right? But maybe if I do my job right, somebody's going to want to hear what I compose. And this goes back to this point of being yourself as a composer. Lean into who you are. There's no better person to invest in musically than yourself, right? Like, just be honest with who you are, embrace it, love yourself for your own compositional voice, and go out there and do what you do best.
That's a great note to end on. But let me ask, are there any plans for a recording of this Turandot completion?
Yes, but as you can imagine, recording an opera is hugely expensive. And somebody has to raise the money, and it might wind up being me with a Kickstarter campaign or something like that. Eventually, yes, I absolutely want to make a proper recording out of this. But what I've also discovered in the opera composing process is writing an opera is a very unique thing. And as a first-timer, there are things in the orchestration which I did not do in the most efficient way possible for the opera stage. And so I want to revise those, as often happens.
Right.
And so I'm going to revise those, and then we'll make a recording.
Okay. Well, I would really love to hear it. So I hope there is one. Yeah. Nicole, you said we had one more comment or question before we wrap up. Oh, this is from Quang in Boston. Are there specific moments performed by Voces 8 that really enhanced your composition, which you would ideally also want to see for the New Mexico premiere? No pressure. Thank you, Quang.
I think the danger that you sort of alluded to, Matt, earlier on, when you write for Voces 8, they can do anything and make it sound effortless. And there is a real temptation to exploit that. And it does not always translate outside of their particular group. I think I wrote, you probably looked at the score more recently than I do. something really super low for their bass too. Like I want to say like a
Yes.
C flat or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's something super, super low. And I voiced some really low chords for their low voices because you can get away with that when it's a quartet of really skilled, pure tone, non-vibrato singers down in that
Right.
register.
Right.
Those sorts of things do not translate to a larger choir as efficiently as
Sure, yeah. And I will
um,
say, you know, because as I've been hearing from my sopranos, the soprano tessitura lays pretty high in a lot of places. But I mean, it's gorgeous. And I think one of my tasks in rehearsing this piece over the course of a week, rehearsing the piece, is to say, you know, a lot of us are going into it with this recording in our ear, and which is a lovely place to start. But our sound, our color, our experience is going to be completely different, and that's our task, is to be expressive with the voices that we have in the room at the time. So
I think that's a great thing to say. I mean, not everyone can be Andrea Haynes from Voces 8, right? I mean,
right.
she's just on a different level, right?
Yeah.
And you know, when you do a project, it's a collaboration with a group like that. You want to write for their voices in particular, but you do know in the back of your head that this is going to create some challenges out there for some people.
Sure, but I mean, I have noticed even in, by the way, it was Barney Smith who encouraged me to take a look at this piece for the festival chorus for this summer, just because he was in love with it and he wanted it to have more performances and more kind of community chorus settings. And I've been noticing that it's been getting a fair number of performances. That makes me happy, and we're very happy to be giving the New Mexico premiere. So as a reminder to our folks as we wrap up, the concert will be Sunday, July 28th, the wonderful concert hall at Visu Cleveland High School, the Quintessence Summer Festival Chorus and Orchestra. Also on the program is music of Chen Yi, Sarah Cortell, Emmylou Deemer, Eric Whitaker, Brahms, Mendelssohn. It's going to be a wonderful afternoon. And I have programmed as the introduction to this, the chamber chorus that we have, Chris, all of those composers, we're doing all bird themed stuff. So,
good. I was going to say,
yeah, we're carrying it through, and then doing your piece on the second half will just be absolutely spectacular. Everybody's looking forward to this so much. So, thank you for the piece, and thank you for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure chatting with you, and I look forward to hearing about how that concert goes.
Okay, we sure will. Thank you to Christopher Tin. Thank you for all of us for tuning in. And we will see you singers when we begin rehearsal a week from Saturday. Go practice. And we hope to see a lot of you at the concert on July 28th. Take care and thanks.